It's expanding, and we have many teachers that need help with their visas, and I need a resolution to be able to hire an attorney to help these teachers. We have about 70 teachers that are teaching French immersion. We have 54 French, 14 Spanish, and 3 Chinese, and a few others in there. So, and they all need help with their visas. We do get money for from the state for the ones on a J1. We get $20,000 each for each teacher to help deflect some of the cost.
I missed, how much was that?
Well, we get $20,000, and then we get another $1,000. The $1,000 goes back to Codafil, but we also get $20,000 per teacher for these teachers, these immersion teachers. That comes to the MFP.
And so I understand both attorneys are existing
Right.
service providers. And
Right.
this is more of an administrative action to make sure that we have the proper resolution in place.
Right.
Okay.
Mr. Muir would like to present to you the way some questions about his billing, if y'all are ready.
Sure.
Well, Ms. Thibodeau, out of the 70 teachers we have teaching immersion, how many of them are J1?
We have 19 J1s and 21 H1Bs.
All right, and the others?
We have some on green cards. We have about 20 on a green card and local.
Okay. Mr. Mayor, I know you're fairly new as far as representing us on the immigration matter, so I'm not sure how far you've gotten through any of your cases, but maybe you can tell us in a standard type immigration visa case that you're handling, about how many hours would it take you? I'm not trying to box you into a certain amount, but...
Sure. Can you hear me?
Not well. Is
There's
it
a little
on?
button.
Do I, okay. All right. Okay. I will be handling primarily 2 types of cases. One type case is an H-1B visa. An H-1B visa is a non-immigrant visa application. And what that means is that the employee is applying for a temporary work visa. H-1B visas are valid for 3 years, but you can get an extension for 3 years. So the temporary nature of the H-1B visa is good for 6 years. The other type of application that I will be working on is the permanent resident application. And typically, the permanent resident application is filed by an H-1B visa holder during the 6 years, preferably earlier than later. And so the permanent resident application is several steps. That's the application for what's known as the green card. And so those are the 2 types. All right. Any questions about those?
Well, yeah, real quick. So what is the school board's obligation to retain an attorney for someone applying for their permanent resident visa?
For permanent resident application process, the employer is responsible for paying for the labor certification process, which is one of the steps in that permanent resident application process. The labor certification process is a process by which the employer has to test the labor market to make sure that the permanent employee will not replace U.S. workers who are not only eligible but also willing to fill the position. So the labor certification process is where the employer goes out and recruits for the position as if it is not filled, and the employer must go through the recruiting process, sending out advertisements, collecting applicants or resumes from applicants, and going through the normal recruiting process, and then make a decision on who to hire. And if there are U.S. workers who are eligible and willing to fill the position, then the foreign national who is typically already holding that job is out of luck, because you have to hire the U.S. worker if that worker is willing to fill that position. And at that point, the foreign national, who's typically an H-1B visa holder in a position within the school board, will have to be terminated unless you can find another position for that person. And so that's just one step in the process, and the employer is responsible for paying for that. There's no filing fees during that process. There's no government filing fees, but you have to pay for the advertisements, and then you have to pay for the legal fees as well.
And the legal fees related just to that component of it?
Yes.
Okay, so what about the rest of the process for the permanent resident visa?
The rest of the process, there are several steps after you go through the labor certification process.
And my question is, what is the school board's obligation to pay for the rest of the process? I want to make sure that we're not paying for services that we're not obligated to pay, because I think that's prohibited by our state constitution.
Okay.
So I want to make sure that we're first obligated to pay for all steps of the process.
I understand.
Okay.
The employer is not obligated to pay for anything other than labor certification. So all of the other steps, the employer is not obligated to pay. The employer can pay, but they're not obligated to pay. And therefore, for those employers who do not want to pay, the burden of paying falls on the applicant, the teachers in this case.
All right. So, Ms. Thibodeau, is there any state or federal regulation that applies to this situation that shows us that we're obligated to pay for the entire process for the permanent resident type visa?
I don't know of any, but I did run this by our general counsel. He has reviewed it, that we're not doing anything that we shouldn't be doing, but I don't know of any statute that says we have to pay. I do know that the teachers need a sponsor, and that was what you were referring to?
Yeah, the employer is a sponsor.
All right. Is there a way to quantify the legal fees? And I'm assuming that for the H-1B component, that is something the employer is obligated for, to bring somebody in.
That's
for the
correct. The
position.
employer by law is required to pay legal fees and filing fees for the H-1B visa application.
Okay. So once we get to the point where they're applying for the permanent residency, can you quantify the difference in cost for the component that the employer is obligated for versus the rest?
Typically, the entire application process, if things run smoothly, if we don't run into any unanticipated hurdles, typically for one applicant, you can expect to spend between $4,000 and $6,000. That includes legal fees and filing fees. The labor certification process. Oh, by the way, that $4,000 to $6,000 does not include the cost of recruiting. And that the cost of recruiting includes paying for advertisements in the Sunday paper, pays for advertisements on the Louisiana Workforce Commission webpage, and those sort of things. During the recruiting process, the employer has to do certain steps. They're required to comply with certain steps, and so you have to do 2 Sunday advertisements. That can get costly. You have to advertise with Louisiana Workforce Commission, and you have to do 3 other things as well. So the $4,000 to $6,000, which is an estimate, does not include recruiting. Now, of that $4,000 to $6,000, I would estimate that $500 to $1,000 is the labor certification process. That is the process that where the employer is required to pay, and that $500 to $1,000 is strictly legal fees. You're paying for the time that it takes And if I were doing a job, you're paying for the time that it would take me and my paralegal to work on that labor certification application and to process it. Now, let me just say this. Sometimes that labor certification application gets audited. And in that case, then your legal fees increase because it just takes more time for us to work on it. I'm talking about if everything goes smoothly, no audits, and it progresses like it normally does.
Mr. Knezik?
So H-1B visas for the non-immigrant visa, what's the code for permanent resident application?
You mean like the
H-1B, what is it?
well, the H-1B is just it's just a type of visa. When you're applying for permanent resident, you get an immigrant visa, but it doesn't have a number, so to speak. It's just you eventually end up with a green card or permanent resident card.
Green card. All right.
Yeah.
So the $4,000 to $6,000 for legal fees, is that estimate all inclusive for H-1B plus the green card?
No, I was just talking about permanent resident.
Okay.
And let me be clear: $4,000 to $6,000 includes legal fees and filing fees for the permanent resident application.
Okay. Is the employer responsible for the filing fees for the labor certification process?
No filing fees during the labor certification process.
Okay, so I want to make sure I understand that
Sure.
the labor certification process legal fees you were estimating should be between $500 and $1,000.
Yes.
But the total cost for that process for the green card should be around $4,000 to $6,000.
Correct.
So there's a delta there. And I think that's what Ms. Morris was trying to figure out was there's a delta there of $3,000 to $5,000, and who is paying for that?
The applicant,
Okay.
unless the employer agrees to pay.
Who has been paying for it, I guess, is a better question.
I can't answer that because I haven't gone through the process
Okay.
yet.
The applicant has been paying for that part, is what I believe.
Okay, so as long as our invoices that we get from the attorneys say labor certification process and all the billable hours and everything, I think that...
Accounting does require them to justify their hours. They have to show what their the hours that they work.
So potentially, once you complete the labor certification process, the teacher could go and find their own immigration attorney to help them with the rest of the procedure.
Yes.
They don't have to use you just because we have a resolution. The resolution for you and Mr. Ward is to help us through the labor certification process, the advertising, and then the H-1B process, the things that we're obligated to do.
Well, I mean, when you're done with the labor certification, the next step is an application for immigrant visa. That step requires an employer to sponsor the application. So technically, the applicant is the employer, and in this case, Lafayette Parish School System. The beneficiary is the teacher. So that application is being filed by LPSS on behalf of the teacher. And so, yes, the teacher can still go and find another attorney, but my understanding of the resolution is that I would be authorized to represent LPSS and the teacher during that part of the application process as well.
Mr. Angel?
Thank you. I thought I understood it perfectly earlier, but now it's fuzzy. That's two parts of what we're talking about. One part is I understand, and I'm gonna incorrectly I'm not gonna use the right phrase, but the part that says we, the employer, is responsible for making sure that no one else, no citizen can do that job.
Labor certification
Labor
process.
certification.
Yes, sir.
Right now, we pay for that.
As far as I know. I mean, you're required.
Right, Ms. Thibodeau, we pay for that.
You should be paying for it.
Now, that portion that we're not obliged to do, that's being paid for by the applicant. Is that to be a permanent citizen? So this resolution will only bind us, if you will, for the first part, the
Labor certification.
labor certification. Is that correct?
After they get the H-1B, sometimes they do file for other things that we do pay for. We do sponsor them for other visas, so we would pay for some of the other expenses.
Well, is one of those other visas or one of those other expenses request for permanent residency?
Right, it could be.
So then we may pay for
We
it.
could sponsor someone and pay for. We have a meeting usually with the principal and Ms. LeBroom, and we decide if what we should do.
Have you ever decided to pay for all the expenses?
We just pay for the part that we have to pay for. Usually the attorney will tell us this is because we're the sponsor. And so that's why I'm unclear because the attorney will say, you're the sponsor, these are the fees that you pay. I mean, this is the bill so
When you say we have to, I thought the only thing that we had to pay for or we were obligated to pay for is the survey.
well, if we decide to sponsor them, though, my understanding is, and Mr. Mayor, you can correct me, my understanding is if we decide to sponsor someone, then we would be obligated to pay more. Is that correct?
Let me try to put this in context. One of my clients is UL. So it's a similar organization, right? They have lots of professors who apply for H-1B visas and permanent resident applications. And these professors are working in different departments within the university, similar to teachers working at different schools within this organization. Well, some departments decide that they're going to pay for the permanent resident application process, the entire process, doing it as a favor to the teacher because it's sort of like a marketing strategy. They want the best talent, so they say, look, we'll pay for your permanent resident application if you come teach. So although the employer is not required to pay for all of the permanent resident application process, sometimes they do. And not every department at UL decides that. They put the burden, some departments put the burden on the teacher. UL can do that for every professor if they wanted to. In your case, you can put the burden on the teacher if you want to, because you're not required by regulation or law to pay for that portion of the application. But in some instances, you may have a school decide that they want to pay for it. I don't know if that's possible, but you may have an instance when LPSS pays for the whole thing.
So one of my
And
concerns.
that's why we have the meeting, is because we talk to the principal and Ms. LeBroom, and she may say, we've got to have this teacher. This teacher's been with us for this many years.
Right, so my concern is more of a legal one. So there's a constitutional provision, a state constitutional provision that says we cannot spend money that we're not obligated for. So now that we're getting into more of the meat of the process, my concern is that, yes, they may be the best French teacher in the entire world, and we want them to stay here forever, but if the Constitution prohibits us from spending taxpayer money that we're not obligated for, which is different than we want to, we need to make sure that we're perfectly clear on that aspect of it. And I understand you talked to our general counsel, but we may need to ask him more specifically to say, with the process broken down, are we able to pay for those fees that we're not legally obligated to pay?
Okay, I understand.
Based on need. So we may just need to flesh that out a little bit more.
Sure.
So that, and like I said, we do have a fantastic immersion program, and we want to do everything we can. But at the same time, we don't want to run afoul of our state constitutional prohibitions also.
Absolutely. I understand. We can do that.
May I continue? Mine is a little bit different concern. Obviously, I'm not an attorney, and I'm not that familiar with our Constitution, but I think we're fortunate we have someone on board who does. My question is, my concern is, I don't think that we should obligate the taxpayer to pay for someone seeking permanent residency, after which that person may go teach somewhere else. And we've paid we, the taxpayer, has borne the expense of granting that person or for that person to arrive at permanent residency. I don't think we should be paying for that at all. And I don't know if we do or if we have in the past, have we obligated that person to anything? I mean, or once it's done, can that person just leave? Or are they obligated to teach for 5 years, 10 years? I mean, what? And if they don't, do they pay us back?
You have an excellent point, and no, sir, they're not obligated. We've not had an issue of anyone leaving, to my knowledge, but you have an excellent point, and that's something we need to go back and look at.
Personally, I feel strong about someone, the taxpayer paying for someone to be permanent citizen. They could teach for another 6 months and then go anywhere else in the country now because they're a permanent citizen. I think we should have at least some kind of a promise, a contract that they're going to do something for that money that we pay.
Right, I agree, Ms. Jones. I agree with you.
So this is kind of a new issue because the attorney who has been helping us has been charging a lump sum, right, for the legal fees, but now we're going on an hourly. So it may become an issue depending on where it's going. So I don't think, my understanding is, in the past, we've just been paying one flat fee. And if it takes him 100 hours, too bad, that's the fee we're paying, right? That's how it's been?
You are correct.
Right.
We have been paying a flat fee.
Okay. So that's, now that we're on an hourly basis, which the Attorney General permits for general legal matters, we just have to now concern ourselves with making sure, again, that we're paying for those things we're allowed to pay for or obligated to pay for. So that we'll have to clear that up. I don't think that'll prevent us from looking at the resolutions today. We'll just have to clean that up or get some resolution either from Mr. Hammonds or from the Attorney General's office. Mr. Knezik, you had some more questions?
Are we going to talk about the specific language on the resolutions next?
If you don't have anything else, we'll go ahead and talk about the resolutions. You want to do Mr. Ward's or Mr. Mears
Let's do
first?
Mr. Ward's.
All right.
Do I need to? I can't get into my computer, so.
I would say
some
that on
help
Mr.
logging in.
Ward's, Suzanne, Ms. Thibodeau, the resolution itself does not have any language in there
I don't know
with the flat fee. So if you read the resolution for Mr. Ward, it's that he's going to be billing hourly under the AG rates.
I do have an email from him that he's going to continue, and I have emails with he and Mr. Hammonds that they agreed. He has agreed to the flat fee, but he also has to now start showing documentation. So, if the flat fee is $600, he's got to show 3 hours.
Right, but the resolution itself doesn't reflect the agreement for the flat fee, so that will need to be amended before it comes to the full board
have
tomorrow.
that amended to say that? Okay.
Make sure Mr. Hammonds is okay with the language showing the flat fee on that.
Okay, I will.
Mr. Knezik has questions, but he's having some technical issues, so give him a few minutes.
I can start with Mr. Ward's. I would like to see the resolution limited to I understand that he has 17 existing clients, is that correct?
Mr. Ward does.
I would
yes.
like to see the resolution language modified to limit the resolution to the 17 existing clients that he has as of 2/14/2017.
Okay.
Okay. And I guess before we start talking about Mr. Mears' resolution, I would say that we do have an intent to kind of look at all of our legal services in the future to see if we can consolidate and reduce our spending on that. So any resolution that's adopted by the board tomorrow is subject, of course, to change in the future. I know that you're here, Mr. Mears, so I just wanted to let you know. So, okay. That's always true. I just wanted to make sure. Okay. All right, do you have anything else on Mr. Ward's?
No, ma'am.
Eric? All right,
Madam
Tommy?
President.
All right, so as far as Mr. Ward's resolution, do you want to make a motion that we, with the suggested amendments, that we move it to the full board for tomorrow?
Right,
for consideration?
I move that we recommend the approval of the resolution for Mr. Ward with the modification of limiting it to the 17 existing clients to go to the board tomorrow.
And Madam President,
Yes,
can I?
yes.
Okay. I just wanted clarification on the 17 applicants that was identified for Mr. Ward. If those applicants would like to change, will they have the option to leave Mr. Ward and change to Mr. Muir, or are they now committed and they have to stay?
I would say that they should probably be allowed to have the option to change, but we would want to make sure, of course, that there's no duplicate legal work being done. But now that Mr. Ward will be itemizing the work that he's doing, then he'll be able to share that with Mr. Muir, for example, if that's where they choose to go. So that would be my thought.
And what kind of agreement do we have outside of verbal handshakes or verbal and handshakes with Mr. Ward that obligate us to a fixed fee for a set amount of work? Do we have any sort of contract or
There was no contract.
retainer
There was no-
agreement?
I
Okay,
have-
so
there was no contract or anything. That's why I'm coming to you, because this was given to me, and when I looked into it, I was not comfortable without the resolution, because I do believe that's an obligation for us to have a resolution and have some type of agreement.
well, I would think that would be up to the employee and then Mr. Muir, assuming he's going to take over that work, to make sure that we don't have any duplicate legal work.
And I guess I would also say that if, for instance, there's someone who Mr. Ward's been working with and the process is almost complete, it's probably not the best idea to switch. However, if it's someone who the process is at the beginning end and not much has taken place yet, then it makes more sense if they want to switch at that time. So there's going to have to be some exercise of discretion and common sense to make that determination. So if you are the point person, or if Mr. Veed is the point person, then I would think that discretion, that's discretion that one of you would have to exercise. So,
Okay.
Mr. Angel, you have any thoughts on that? Okay. Mr. Knezik? All right. If there's no further comments or questions from the public, does anyone want to come up and say anything? All right. Then, Madam. Mr. Angel. And whenever you're ready, we'll call for the vote. And this is to move Mr. Ward's resolution with the amended changes to the full board for tomorrow.
Three, for, none against.
All right, now we'll take up the resolution for Mr. Muir. Mr. Knezik, you had some recommended changes?
I have a question first, in that the work, Mr. Muir, the work that you're doing now, is it for people that we are looking to hire for the next school year, or how far out are we working on cases?
I am working on H-1B visa extension applications. So some of these people are already employed by LPSS. They're just looking to extend their H-1B so they can continue working for LPS beyond the initial 3-year period. I am also working on permanent resident applications for current employees of LPSS. And they are H-1B visa holders as well.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, this, Mr. Mayor, this actually goes back, I'm kind of backing up a little bit on the certification process. Let's say, for instance, you have 4 teachers who want to extend their H-1B. They're all here at the same time. Can you do that career certification process once for all 4, or you have to do separate advertisements for each of the 4?
Well, okay.
Do you understand my question?
Well, let me clarify, okay? No offense, okay?
This
just
is
wanna
an
make
area of
sure-
law I have no knowledge of,
Okay.
so.
For H-1B visa applications, you don't go through the labor certification process. You only do it for permanent resident applications. Okay? So, if let's say you had 4 H-1B visa holders who all want to apply for permanent resident application at the same time, and it's the exact same job, then you can advertise for those jobs using the same advertisement. You can save money that way. And you go through the recruiting process with the intent on hiring, say, 4. Okay?
So like 4 5th grade French immersion teachers?
Yes.
Does it have to be that specific, or can it be elementary, or can it be French immersion?
Yeah, I don't know if it has to be that specific. I guess it would depend on how you guys normally recruit, because you have to recruit just like you normally do. You can't change it up
Right.
just because you have a permanent resident waiting in the wings.
Okay. All right. So Mr. Knezik, you had some suggested changes for the language of the resolution?
Well, the resolution doesn't have an end, but can always be modified. We know that, right?
Right.
So no, I don't think I have any language on the resolution specifically. I would make a recommendation to staff that I think it's important that when we have opportunities like this, especially in the economy that we have today, when we have opportunities to hire counsel, I realize that it appears that we are shifting from counsel that was based in Baton Rouge to counsel that's based in Lafayette. So I think I commend you for that. But I think that when we make these decisions to employ special counsel or to hire anybody, it's important as a public body that we give opportunity to all those, especially those locally that can provide these services. Whether we hire them or not, we can base that off an objective evaluation process, rates, reputation, and so forth. But I think that it's important that we give other firms or other lawyers an opportunity to potentially become the special counsel for not just immigration matters, but other matters as well. So while we are closing out, it appears, services with Mr. Ward and then using Mr. Meir for the needs that we have now, I would like to see some sort of process where we solicit similar services from lawyers within Lafayette Parish or the Acadiana area, so that we can get adequate competition and then provide those opportunities for other law firms. Because I know everybody's hungry right now. And that's it. Thank you.
All right, so I'll entertain a motion on Mr. Meir's resolution.
And I move that we recommend the resolution 0217-1900 as is to the board tomorrow.
All right, any further questions or comments? Ms. Samick?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. I just want to express that I have listened to several of the immersion teachers express a concern about the quality of the services they have received for the money they have invested, not just school board money, but their own money. And I know they're very appreciative of the opportunity to use a local lawyer, someone that they can speak with without having to travel to Baton Rouge, or even more importantly, just using email or speaking with an attorney on the phone when perhaps language is a partial barrier. So thank you very much for the opportunity for us to expand our services locally. I appreciate it.
Madam President, I do have one quick question. I just noticed in the paragraph where it starts with "be it further resolved," it establishes a maximum hourly rate of $200 and refers you to attachment Exhibit A, where the lead rate is $225. Just want to make sure that that is correct, or is that a typo?
That is correct. You want to speak to that, Mr. Muir?
For the committee's information, I qualify for the 225 rate, but in order to stay competitive, I'm going to charge you my normal immigration rate, $200. And my paralegal is going to charge the rate on the exhibit, $60. She normally charges $100, but she's going to charge $60. Just so that we can remain competitive, because we want your business and we think we can do a good job at a reasonable price.
Thank you.
Well, and of course, under the AG guidelines, she can't charge more than 60 anyway, so, but thank you for reducing your rate, because you certainly could charge more under the AG rate, so. All right, if there's no further comments or questions, I'll call for the vote.
Ms. Morse?
I'm sorry, did you have a comment, ma'am? Come up,
They did.
come up, I'm sorry, come up to the podium, please. Yeah, but come up to the podium, please. These are recorded, so if anybody wants to watch from home, they want to hear your question.
I'm a French teacher. I'm supposed to reapply for an extension H1B with Mr. Ward. And my question is, do we have to use one of those lawyers, or can we come with our own lawyer?
If you're going to pay out of pocket, you can come with your own lawyer, but for anything that the school system pays for, they have to be approved through the state attorney general, which is what the resolutions are doing.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
but it may be that Mr. Muir, for example, would help you with the part that we're obligated, and you could pay for the remainder yourself. That would be up to
for
you.
H1B, my understanding say that the extension is supposed to be, H1B is supposed to be paid for by
If
the
that, right,
employee.
whatever, right, so whatever,
I can choose any lawyer I want, but you still will have to pay for it.
you would have to use one that we get approval for from the state attorney general.
Okay.
Which these two resolutions will, if they're adopted tomorrow night, will be submitted for approval by the state attorney general.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Yes, ma'am.
Bonsoir.
Francois.
I would like to thank Mr. Muir. I've really heard wonderful things about him from the teachers currently receiving services from him. I really like that we're giving them an option now as to which legal services to go with. I think that can do nothing but improve the services that they receive. Also, in regard to the advertising for positions, we had discussed earlier making a new job description for immersion teachers because it's so specific that they have to be very bilingual in order to fulfill the position. So a new job description may be in order for them in order to properly vet whoever's applying for those positions when they open.
Then we'll look forward to seeing that come before us.
Thank you.
All right, the matter's up for a vote.
Three, four, none against.
All right, so I have two other matters I want to just make sure we clarify on this particular topic. One is I would strongly suggest that the HR department, if you are the point for these teachers and the coordination with the immigration attorneys, that you develop a guideline that sets forth how and when teachers can come to you and say, we have been using this attorney, we want to switch to this one. Set that up as a guideline, and of course run it through staff and Dr. Aguilard to make sure it's something fair and equitable, but something posted so that all the teachers who would need to know that information would have access to that. The second thing I would like to ask staff is to request from our general counsel first an opinion regarding the matters we've talked about here, the specific matters about whether we can voluntarily pay for the cost for a permanent resident visa under our state constitution and or whether that would be prohibited. And if he's not sure, then we may need to consider asking the Attorney General the same question. Okay. Any other questions or comments? All right, then those are the only matters on the agenda, so this meeting is adjourned.